There's a survey just out of American opinion, and it's a survey that tries to assess how Americans view America's standing in the world. And the survey shows that there has been a sharp drop. In other words, an almost 9% drop, 8.2% of Americans have lost confidence in America as being the leading power in the world. Now, this is supposed to be the second largest rapid drop that's been measured in 20 years. So what's the cause of it? Well, on the front, the cause of it is Afghanistan. The poll shows that people think that this was a debacle, the unnecessary deaths of American forces in Afghanistan, the Americans left behind to this day. It might have vanished from the media, but it hasn't vanished from people's psyche. They know that there are Americans still stuck in Afghanistan. We spent $1 trillion, all those lives lost over the years. And what do we have to show for it? Even our allies have been harshly critical of America, which is to say the Biden administration's role in this disastrous pullout. And so we see a drop of confidence in America, coming from Republicans to be sure, but also from independents. 11-point drop. Also Democrats, we see a 5.3% drop. Even Democrats think that America's position is eroding and is eroding due to the actions of the current administration. But I think all of this, although interesting, understates the broader significance of what's been happening, not just in America, but around the world. Let's pull back to one of the great promises of globalization. By the way, a cause promoted by left and right over the past 30 years and more. And the idea, going back to the fall of the Soviet Union, is we need to have this kind of neoliberal world order. And if we do, a world order that's based upon liberal democracy, it's based upon capitalism, we're going to try to make everybody more like us. So the effect of capitalism, and the idea here is that as the Chinese embrace, for example, capitalism, that you're going to have Chinese say, wait, now that I've got a nice apartment, now that I've got a car, I want the right to vote. I want my own privacy. I want the ability to assemble. I want to be able to have a voice in the government. So the idea is that the embrace of capitalism would somehow bring with it an embrace of democracy. This was argued by Francis Fukuyama. It was argued by many others. Kind of an article of faith, and faith is the right word here, among the elites in American foreign policy, even on the Republican side. And now, all these years later, we can look back and say, well, let's look at it. Has China, in fact, become more like America? I think we'd have to say no. In no measurable respect has China become less Chinese, more American, or has embraced the wider ensemble of American institutions. No democracy, no checks and balances, no real separation of powers, no real civil liberties. So China has not, in fact, become more like America. But the question that's never asked, and that I want to raise now, is, has America become more like China? That certainly would be a surprise. That was certainly not predicted by the neoliberal order, that the attempt to globalize the planet would make us, our country, more like them. Now, it would be very troubling if we were moving in that direction, and I think we are. Let me say why. Number one, the Chinese have state-controlled capitalism. They have capitalism, but it's under the thumb of the state. I wouldn't say our capitalist system is fully under the thumb of the state, but I would say it is increasingly under the thumb of the state. Remember, under Obama, the auto companies, the banks, financial institutions, insurance companies, healthcare companies, all now operating under government regulations, government mandates. The government, in a sense, controls them. They can't really make any major decisions without the government. Number two, an avalanche of state propaganda. We see that in China. We now see this in America. In America, it's often conducted through with the cooperation of other institutions, digital media companies, the so-called mainstream media, people working in coordination with the state, but nevertheless, it's at the direction of the state. Limitation on speech and the restriction of dissent. In China, we've seen that ever since Tiananmen Square in a pretty blatant form. We're seeing it in America. The restriction of dissent. We have mass censorship now in America. Who would have thought? But here it is. And all of us have to operate in some level in the knowledge that there are many things, not one thing, not two things, but many things. The discussion of major issues that can't be had freely, or you are off the digital public square. You're off the major platforms by which most Americans today communicate. The prosecution of dissenters, that's gone on in China. We saw that in Tiananmen Square. I wonder in retrospect if January 6th will be seen historically as our Tiananmen Square. Why? You've got desperate protesters seeking to have their voices heard. You've got a vicious government crackdown and prosecution. And then the incident itself serves as a pretext to impose a widespread regime of ostracism, of mass censorship, of restriction of not just the people who were in DC, not just the people who stormed the Capitol, restrictions that apply to you and me, restrictions that apply, I won't say to everyone, but to everyone who doesn't go along with the party line. China has a one-party state informed by Marxist and sort of leftist ideology. I wouldn't say we have a one-party state, but we have a one-party government that operates like a one-party state. It's certainly trying to become a one-party state. It wants only token opposition. Yeah, we want Romney to raise a kind of quibble every now and then, and maybe Murkowski, but we don't really want Republicans who act like Republicans. We don't want an active, vigorous opposition. No. We actually want to have our will untrammeled to succeed. The only real difference between China and America that I can see is that the Chinese are affirming nationalism. They're trying to whip up patriotism. They're trying to mobilize and unify the country behind a kind of Chinese pride and you don't even have to ask them if they're putting China first. Of course they are. Here in America, however, we seem to be divided. We seem to be fractured, far from pursuing a kind of common purpose. The only purpose that I can see that our government is pursuing is taking the country down. So weirdly, here's where American objectives and Chinese objectives converge. They're trying to take us down, and evidently, the Biden administration is trying to take us down. So even on this one area where the two countries seem to be far apart, nevertheless, in a strange way, they are operating towards, you may say, a unified objective.